For years, the geopolitical landscape of Europe had been fracturing under the weight of rising totalitarianism, aggressive territorial demands, and the failure of international diplomacy to stop Adolf Hitler's ambitions. Poland, sitting strategically between two hostile titans, became the ultimate target. On September 1, 1939, the fragile peace of the continent finally collapsed as Nazi Germany launched a massive, unprovoked invasion of Poland, forcing Great Britain and France to declare war and officially igniting the Second World War. This full-length documentary brings together the entire tragic timeline of the 1939 campaign. First, we will analyze the terrifying mechanics of the German Blitzkrieg that overwhelmed the border defenses. And second, we will explore the subsequent agony, the heroic underground resistance, and the ultimate fall of a nation that refused to surrender its honor.
September 1st, 1939, 4:45 in the morning. The Baltic coast of Poland is still dark. At Westerplatte, a small military depot on a narrow peninsula near the city of Danzig, 182 Polish soldiers are asleep in their barracks. They are a garrison unit. Their job is to guard an ammunition warehouse. Nobody expects them to fight a war. Then the world explodes. The German battleship Schleswig Holstein, which has been anchored in Danzig harbor for 3 days, officially on a courtesy visit, opens fire with its 280mm guns at point-blank range. The sound is heard across the entire city. In Warsaw, 350 kilometers to the south, people are woken by air raid sirens they have never heard used in anger before. Mothers grab children, men run to windows. Nobody quite understands what is happening. In London, the phone rings in Downing Street. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler is already awake. He has been planning this morning for months. In 1,000 Polish towns and villages along a frontier stretching 1,900 kilometers, from the Baltic coast in the north to the Carpathian Mountains in the south, the same thing is happening simultaneously. German bombs are falling, German tanks are moving, and the Second World War, the conflict that will kill 70 million people and reshape the entire world, has begun. Not with a declaration, not with a warning. In the darkness, before breakfast, while most of Europe is still asleep.
To understand why German bombs are falling on Poland this September morning, you need to go back just a few years. Not decades, not generations, just a few years. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, a country humiliated by defeat in the First World War, crushed by the economic terms of the Versailles Treaty, desperate for someone who promised to restore what had been lost. Hitler promised exactly that. And he delivered, at first. The economy recovered, the military was rebuilt, lost territories were reclaimed one by one. Austria in 1938, Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland the same year, then the rest of Czechoslovakia in 1939. Each time, Britain and France protested. Each time, they did nothing. Hitler drew a simple conclusion from this pattern. The Western democracies would not fight. Poland was different for one reason. It had a formal military guarantee from Britain and France. If Germany attacked, they would declare war. Hitler didn't believe them. He had made one other move before giving the order to attack. In August 1939, just 1 week before the invasion, his foreign minister Ribbentrop flew to Moscow and signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin. The two men who hated each other most in the world had made a deal. Germany would take Western Poland. The Soviet Union would take the East. Poland, the country being divided, was not consulted. With his eastern flank secured, Hitler gave the order. Fall Weiss, case white. The invasion of Poland. 1.5 million German soldiers, 2,700 tanks, 2,000 aircraft. Against a Polish army that was brave, determined, and facing the most modern military force on Earth, with weapons and tactics that belonged to a different era. What happened next lasted 35 days and changed the world forever.
At Westerplatte, the first shells from the Schleswig Holstein have turned the Polish barracks into rubble. Major Henryk Sukarski, commander of the garrison, crawls through the smoke to assess what is left of his defenses. He has 182 men. He has food for 7 days. He has orders to hold for 12 hours, just long enough to signal to Poland and the world that the country will resist. 12 hours. That is all anyone expects of them. Sukarski looks at what the German shells have done to his position in the first 60 seconds of the war. He looks at the Schleswig Holstein, sitting 400 meters offshore, its guns already reloading. He looks at the German infantry beginning to move toward the perimeter through the trees, and he gives the order to fight. Meanwhile, 500 kilometers to the south, the men of the German 10th Army are crossing the Polish border in the pre-dawn darkness near the city of Częstochowa. Among them are the tanks of the 1st Panzer Division, the leading edge of a new kind of warfare that the world has never seen before. These are not the slow, heavily armored machines of the First World War. These are fast, coordinated, radio-equipped units that work together with aircraft overhead and motorized infantry alongside. They don't stop at obstacles, they go around them. They don't wait for orders from headquarters. They move on their own initiative, faster than the enemy can respond.
The Poles defending the border have never faced anything like this. The border guards of the Polish Border Protection Corps, the Korpus Ochrony Pogranicza, are the first to encounter the German advance. These are not elite troops. They are lightly armed men spread thinly along a frontier that stretches for hundreds of kilometers. Their job in peacetime is to prevent smuggling and illegal crossings. Now, they are the first line of defense against the most powerful military force in Europe. They fight anyway. In dozens of small engagements along the frontier, Polish border guards hold their positions against overwhelming odds, buying hours, sometimes just minutes, for the units behind them to organize. Most of them die where they stand. In the skies above, the situation is equally desperate. The Polish Air Force, the Lotnictwo Wojskowe, has approximately 400 combat aircraft. They are outnumbered 4-1 by the Luftwaffe. Their planes, the PZL P-11 fighters that form the backbone of Polish air defenses, are already obsolete. They are slower than the German bombers they are trying to intercept, let alone the German fighters escorting them. But the Polish pilots are extraordinary. Captain Mieczysław Medwecki, commander of the 111th Fighter Squadron, is airborne within minutes of the first German crossing. He and his pilots climb into skies already thick with German aircraft and begin fighting with everything they have. The odds are impossible. They attack anyway. And in Warsaw, the bombs are already falling. The Luftwaffe's bombing campaign against the Polish capital begins in the first hours of September 1st. The targets are military, airfields, railway junctions, military depots. But in a city of 1.3 million people, bombs do not always find their intended targets. Civilians run through the streets as explosions walk across the city. Buildings that stood for centuries collapse in seconds. Fires start in residential neighborhoods. The air fills with dust and smoke and the sound of aircraft engines that never seem to stop. A city that woke up that morning in peacetime is ending the day in ruins, and it is only the first day.
By the end of the first day, the situation for Poland is already critical. But Poland is not broken. Not yet. Across the entire length of the front, from the Baltic coast to the Carpathian Mountains, Polish soldiers are fighting with a ferocity that surprises even their German attackers. These are not men who have given up. These are men who understand exactly what is at stake: their country, their families, their entire way of life, and who have decided that if they are going to lose, they will make the Germans pay for every kilometer. At Westerplatte, Major Sukarski's 182 men are still holding. The Germans have thrown everything at them. Naval gunfire from the Schleswig Holstein, bombing runs by Juncker's Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, the screaming aircraft that have become the symbol of German air power, infantry assaults through the trees and across the open ground surrounding the garrison. Every assault is repelled. The Germans attacking Westerplatte are not poorly trained conscripts. They are SS Heimwehr Danzig, experienced, well-equipped troops who expected to overwhelm the Polish position in a matter of hours. Instead, they are being stopped by men armed with rifles, machine guns, and an unwillingness to quit that defies military logic. The 12 hours Sukarski was asked to hold have come and gone. He keeps fighting. Further south, along the main line of the German advance, something is happening that will become one of the most misunderstood episodes of the entire Polish campaign: the charge of the cavalry. The image that much of the world would later carry of the Polish military in 1939 is of cavalry, men on horseback, charging German tanks with sabers drawn. It is an image that became shorthand for hopeless backwardness, for a country so antiquated it didn't understand what century it was fighting in.
It is also largely a myth. The Polish cavalry, the Brigada Cavalieri, were not the obsolete relics of a previous era that German propaganda would later portray them as. They were highly mobile infantry who used horses for transportation, not for charging machine guns. They were trained to dismount and fight on foot, to move faster than any motorized unit through difficult terrain, to strike and disappear before the enemy could respond. They were, by any objective measure, among the finest light infantry in Europe. On September 1st, near the town of Krojanty in the Pomeranian corridor, a squadron of the 18th Pomeranian Uhlans, Polish cavalry, encountered a German infantry unit resting in a forest clearing. Their commander, Colonel Kazimierz Mastelers, made a decision. He ordered a charge. Not against tanks, against infantry, in the open, in exactly the situation cavalry had been designed for. The charge worked. The German infantry scattered in panic. And then German armored cars emerged from the tree line and opened fire. The squadron took heavy casualties. Colonel Mastelers was killed. Italian and German journalists who arrived shortly afterward saw the bodies of Polish cavalry and German tanks in the same field and drew a conclusion that fit perfectly with the story Germany wanted to tell. The Poles had charged tanks with sabers. It was not what happened, but the image stuck. Meanwhile, the Polish army Lodz, one of the main defensive formations positioned to protect the industrial heartland of central Poland, is facing the full weight of the German 8th and 10th armies.
General Julius Rummel commands the Army Lodz. He is a capable officer dealing with an impossible situation. His forces are spread across a front too wide to defend properly, facing German armored units that don't fight the way any previous enemy has fought. The German tanks don't stop at the Polish defensive lines. They go around them. They penetrate deep behind Polish positions, cutting supply lines, surrounding units that thought they were defending against a frontal assault, appearing where nobody expected them to be. Rummel's forces are not being defeated in pitched battle. They are being made irrelevant. By the time Polish units understand where the German spearheads actually are, the situation has already changed. By the time orders arrive from headquarters, the orders are already out of date. By the time reinforcements are dispatched, the gap they were meant to fill has moved. The Polish army is fighting hard, but it is fighting a war that has already moved on without it. And on the third day of the invasion, news arrives that changes the psychological picture entirely. Warsaw is being evacuated. Not the military, the government. Polish President Ignacy Mościcki and the cabinet are leaving the capital and moving southeast toward the Romanian border. The decision is militarily sound. Keeping the government mobile and out of German reach is strategically correct. But for the soldiers fighting on the front lines, the news lands like a punch. If the government is leaving Warsaw, what exactly are they fighting for? The answer, for most of them, is the same answer it has always been: Poland. Not the government, not the politicians, not the borders drawn by Versailles. The country itself, the language, the people, the thing that had survived 123 years of partition and would survive this too. They keep fighting.
By September 7th, 1 week into the invasion, the shape of the catastrophe is becoming clear. Not to the outside world, not yet. The newspapers in London and Paris are still reporting that Poland is holding, that the front is stabilizing, that the German advance is being slowed. It isn't. The German 4th Panzer Division has reached the outskirts of Warsaw. 1 week, from the German border to the gates of the Polish capital, a distance that military planners on both sides had assumed would take weeks to cover, covered in 7 days. The men of the 4th Panzer Division are not stopping to admire their progress. Their commander, General George Hans Reinhardt, pushes them forward. The orders are clear: get to Warsaw, get inside, end this quickly. But Warsaw is not going to fall quietly. The civilians of the city, those who haven't fled, are already building barricades, digging trenches in the parks. passing sandbags hand to hand along lines that stretch for city blocks. Men who have never held a rifle are being handed rifles. Women are carrying ammunition. Children are delivering messages between defensive positions. A city of 1.3 million people is preparing to fight. The 4th Panzer Division hits the Warsaw defenses on September 8th. What happens next shocks the German commanders. The attack fails. Polish artillery, positioned carefully in the streets and buildings of the city's western suburbs, opens fire on the advancing German armor with devastating accuracy. Anti-tank guns that the Germans didn't know were there destroy vehicle after vehicle. Infantry in prepared positions in the apartment buildings along the main approach roads pour fire onto the German columns from above and from the sides. General Reinhardt pulls his division back.
Information Warsaw has held for now, but the news from the rest of the country is uniformly bad. In the north, the German Third Army driving south from East Prussia has broken through the Polish Modlin Army and is threatening to encircle the entire Polish force defending the corridor to the Baltic. In the south, the German 14th Army is pushing through the Carpathian Mountains faster than anyone thought possible, threatening to outflank the entire Polish southern defensive line. And in the center, the place where the Polish High Command had concentrated its strongest forces, the situation is collapsing in a way that is almost impossible to comprehend in real time. General Tadeusz Kutreba commands the Polish Army Poznan, approximately 230,000 men positioned in the Poznan region in western Poland. For the first week of the war, his army has been sitting largely intact. The German advance has gone around him, the Blitzkrieg driving east so fast that the Army Poznan has been bypassed, left behind, rendered temporarily irrelevant by the speed of the German movement. Kutreba looks at his maps. He sees something extraordinary. The German forces driving east have left their northern flank exposed. The 8th Army moving toward Warsaw is stretched thin, moving fast, not expecting an attack from the side. Kutreba proposes a counterattack. His superiors authorize it. On September 9th, 8 days into the invasion, the Army Poznan turns south and strikes the exposed flank of the German 8th Army on the Bzura River. The Germans are caught completely off guard.
For 2 days, the Battle of the Bzura goes in Poland's favor. Polish infantry and cavalry push the German units back. Prisoners are taken. Ground is recaptured. For the first and only time in the entire campaign, a major Polish offensive achieves real tactical success. In Berlin, the news causes momentary alarm. German High Command rushes reinforcements to the Bzura. Luftwaffe units are redirected from other parts of the front. The full weight of German air power descends on the Army Poznan. Hundreds of aircraft attacking the Polish columns in the open, on roads, crossing rivers, with no effective air defense to protect them. General Kutreba's counterattack, brilliant in conception, devastating in its initial execution, is slowly ground down by the sheer weight of German firepower. But his men keep fighting. For 10 days, the Battle of the Bzura continues, the largest battle of the entire Polish campaign. The Army Poznan fights not because it can win, but because fighting is the only alternative to surrender, and these men are not ready to surrender. Some units break through towards Warsaw. Most don't. Meanwhile, at Westerplatte, something remarkable is still happening. Major Sucharski and his 182 men are on day 7. They were asked to hold for 12 hours. They have held for 7 days. The garrison is a ruin. The barracks are destroyed. The defenders are exhausted, many of them wounded, surviving on dwindling food and ammunition in positions that have been pounded continuously by naval gunfire, dive bombers, and infantry assaults. On September 7th, Sucharski makes his decision.
He has done what he was asked to do. He has done far more than what was asked of him. Further resistance will accomplish nothing except the deaths of the men still capable of fighting. He raises the white flag. The German commander who accepts the surrender, Lieutenant General Eberhard, is so impressed by the defense of Westerplatte that he allows Sucharski to keep his ceremonial sword. It is a gesture almost without precedent in the German conduct of the Polish campaign. A small dignity in the middle of a catastrophe. As Sucharski and his surviving men march into captivity, the German soldiers lining the road do something unexpected. They stand at attention. 182 men, 7 days, against everything the German military could bring against them. It is not enough to change the outcome of the campaign. Nothing at this point can change the outcome of the campaign. But it means something to the Poles watching, to the world that will eventually hear the story, to the idea, stubborn, costly, sometimes seemingly suicidal, that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. Poland is losing this war. But Poland has not stopped fighting. And it won't. Not today. Not for the next 6 years.
September 7th, 1939. 1 week of war. And the picture that emerges from that first week tells two stories simultaneously. Stories that contradict each other and yet are both completely true. The first story is military. Germany is winning, comprehensively, devastatingly. The Blitzkrieg has worked exactly as designed. Polish defensive lines that were supposed to hold for weeks have been penetrated in days. The Polish Air Force, outgunned and outnumbered from the first hour, is being systematically destroyed on the ground and in the air. Supply lines are cut. Communications between Polish units are breaking down. The High Command is losing the ability to coordinate a coherent response to an enemy that moves faster than any army in history. By any objective military assessment, the campaign is already decided. Poland cannot win this war. The second story is human, and it is something else entirely. At Westerplatte, 182 men held for 7 days against everything the German military could bring against them, and marched into captivity with their heads up and their commander's sword at his side. On the Buzra River, General Kutreba turned his army into the flank of a force that was supposed to be unstoppable, and for 10 days made the Germans genuinely afraid. In the skies over Poland, pilots flying obsolete aircraft that were slower than the bombers they were trying to intercept kept climbing into the fight every single day.
In Warsaw, civilians who had never been soldiers picked up rifles and started building barricades before anyone asked them to. These are not the actions of a country that has given up. These are the actions of a country that understands something very clearly. Losing a battle is not the same as losing a war, and losing a war is not the same as losing everything. In London and Paris, the governments that guaranteed Poland's security are finally moving. On September 3rd, 2 days after the invasion began, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The declaration changes very little on the ground in Poland right now. No British soldiers are crossing the channel. No French tanks are rolling toward the German border. The phony war, the strange, static standoff on the Western Front, is beginning. But the declaration means something larger. It means that what started on September 1st on a narrow peninsula near Danzig is no longer just Poland's war. It is the world's war, and it is only just beginning. Next, the second week of the Polish campaign. Soviet tanks cross the eastern border. Poland finds itself fighting on 2 fronts simultaneously, and the fate of an entire nation is decided in the ruins of its own capital.
September 17th, 1939. Poland has been fighting for 16 days. The country is battered. The front lines are collapsing. Warsaw is under siege. The army is exhausted, undersupplied, and fighting on borrowed time. But it is still fighting. And then, at 3 in the morning, Soviet Ambassador Wacław Grzybowski is summoned to the Soviet Foreign Ministry in Moscow. He is handed a note. It informs him that the Polish state has ceased to exist, that the Soviet Union is therefore obligated to protect the Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities living in eastern Poland, that Soviet forces are crossing the border immediately. Grzybowski refuses to accept the note. It doesn't matter. By the time he is reading it, Soviet tanks are already moving. At dawn, along a frontier stretching 1,400 kilometers from the Baltic to the Romanian border, the Red Army crosses into Poland from the east. Over 450,000 Soviet soldiers, thousands of tanks, hundreds of aircraft. Poland, which has been fighting one of the most powerful armies in the world for 16 days, now has a second front. There are no more reserves, no more fallback positions. No more options. The knife has gone in from behind, and the fate of Poland is sealed.
When the news of the Soviet invasion reaches Polish commanders on the morning of September 17th, the reaction is not panic. It is something closer to disbelief. For 16 days, Poland has been fighting Germany. Every available soldier, every available gun, every available aircraft has been committed to the Western Front. The entire strategic logic of the Polish defense, flawed as it was built around one assumption: the Soviet Union would stay out. Not because anyone trusted Stalin, not because the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had gone unnoticed, but because Polish commanders had calculated, reasonably based on everything they knew, that the Soviets would wait, that they would watch, that they would not move until the outcome of the German campaign was clear. They were wrong. Stalin had been watching the German invasion with something between admiration and anxiety. The speed of the Blitzkrieg had surprised even him. Poland was collapsing faster than anyone had anticipated, and Stalin had a simple, cold calculation to make. If he waited too long, Germany would take everything. If he moved now, he could claim his half of the deal. So he moved. The Soviet forces crossing the eastern border of Poland on September 17th are not fighting a prepared enemy. The Polish Korpus Ochrony Pogranicze, the border protection corps that guards the eastern frontier, is a skeleton force. Most of its units have already been transferred west to fight the Germans.
What remains is a thin line of border guards facing an army of 450,000. Polish Commander-in-Chief Marshal Edward Śmigły-Rydz faces an impossible decision. He has perhaps 350,000 Polish soldiers still capable of organized resistance. They are already engaged with the Germans on multiple fronts. Their ammunition is running low. Their supply lines have been cut in a dozen places. If he orders them to turn and fight the Soviets as well, the army will be destroyed between two enemies within days. If he orders a general retreat toward Romania and Hungary, the only neutral borders still accessible, he can save a portion of the army to fight another day. From exile, from the west, from wherever Poland can regroup and continue the war. Śmigły-Rydz makes his decision. He issues orders for Polish forces to retreat toward the Romanian and Hungarian borders. They are not to engage Soviet forces unless directly attacked. The priority is to save as many men as possible. It is the right decision militarily. It feels, to the soldiers receiving the orders, like abandonment. Private Jan Kowalski of the 19th Infantry Division later wrote in his diary about the moment he heard the order to retreat east rather than continue fighting west. He wrote that he stood in a field in eastern Poland and didn't know which direction to look. Germans behind him, Soviets in front of him. His country disappearing from beneath his feet. He wrote that he thought about his family in Warsaw, and then he picked up his rifle and started walking south, because there was nothing else to do.
For the civilians of eastern Poland, the Soviet arrival brings a different kind of terror. The Red Army enters towns and villages that have barely heard the sound of German bombs, places where the war has been something happening far away, reported in newspapers, felt only in the absence of men who have gone to fight. Now the war is here. Soviet soldiers, many of them from Central Asia, from backgrounds so different from the Polish population that communication is almost impossible, move through the towns with orders that reflect Stalin's priorities rather than any conventional military objective. Polish officers are arrested, government officials are detained, landowners, teachers, priests, anyone who represents the Polish state or Polish society in any organized form are taken away. Many of them will never come back. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, follows the Red Army into eastern Poland with lists of names and a systematic plan to destroy the leadership class of Polish society. It is not a military occupation. It is a decapitation. And it is happening simultaneously with the final agony of the campaign in the West.
While Soviet tanks are crossing the eastern border, the largest battle of the entire Polish campaign is reaching its devastating conclusion in central Poland. The Battle of the Bzura. General Tadeusz Kutrzewa's army Poznan has been fighting for 8 days. What began as a brilliant surprise attack on the exposed flank of the German 8th Army has turned into a fighting retreat toward Warsaw, the last city still in Polish hands, the last place where the army might find shelter, resupply, and a chance to continue the fight. Kutrzewa has perhaps 170,000 men still under his command. They are moving through a landscape that has become a killing ground. The Germans have recovered from the shock of the initial Polish counterattack with characteristic efficiency. General Walter von Brauchitsch, commander of the German army, has redirected forces from across the front to seal the pocket forming around the army Poznan. 8 German divisions are now pressing in from multiple directions simultaneously. And above, always above, the Luftwaffe. This is where the battle is really being decided. Not on the ground, where Polish infantry are fighting with extraordinary tenacity, holding defensive lines far longer than any rational military calculation would suggest possible, but in the air, where German aircraft are operating without any serious opposition. The Polish Air Force, what remains of it after 16 days of combat, has been effectively destroyed. The pilots who were flying obsolete PZL fighters in the first days of the campaign have been killed, wounded, or forced to land on airfields that no longer exist. The aircraft that are still airworthy are scattered, cut off from fuel and spare parts, unable to concentrate in any meaningful way.
The skies over the Bzura belong to Germany. Heinkel H-111 bombers fly in formation over the Polish columns moving toward Warsaw. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers peel off one by one and scream down onto the roads packed with men, horses, artillery, and the thousands of civilians who have attached themselves to the army column, hoping for protection. There is no protection. The bombs fall on soldiers and civilians alike. Roads that were passable in the morning are blocked by burning vehicles by afternoon. River crossings that Polish engineers have worked through the night to prepare are destroyed before the troops can use them. Units that have maintained their cohesion through 8 days of fighting begin to fragment under the relentless air attack. Kutrzewa watches his army being destroyed from above and makes the only decision available to him. Keep moving. Keep pushing toward Warsaw. Some units make it. The 15th Infantry Division fights its way through German lines and crosses the Vistula River on makeshift rafts under fire, arriving in Warsaw suburbs on September 16th, exhausted, decimated, but intact as a fighting unit. The 25th Infantry Division breaks through near Sochachev after a night attack that catches the German cordon temporarily off guard. They lose half their men in the crossing, but the other half reaches Warsaw. But for most of the army Poznan, Warsaw remains out of reach. German forces tighten the ring. The pocket shrinks.
By September 18th, the day after the Soviet invasion begins, the Battle of the Bzura is effectively over. The last organized resistance collapses near the Campinos Forest, west of Warsaw. Soldiers who have been fighting continuously for more than 2 weeks, without adequate food, without sleep, without ammunition, finally reach the end of what human endurance can sustain. Some surrender in formed units, their officers leading them into captivity with whatever dignity can be preserved. Some scatter into the forests, hoping to find a way through German lines, to reach Warsaw, to continue fighting somehow. Some are simply overwhelmed where they stand. General Kutrzewa himself is captured on September 22nd. He has commanded one of the most remarkable fighting retreats of the entire war, a force that should have been destroyed in days, lasting more than 2 weeks, counterattacking when counterattack seemed impossible, fighting to the last viable moment. In German captivity, Kutrzewa is treated with the respect his conduct has earned. His army is gone. 100,000 Polish soldiers have been killed, wounded, or captured in the Battle of the Bzura. But the men who made it through, the soldiers of the 15th and 25th Infantry Divisions, and the scattered survivors who found their way across the Vistula, are now inside Warsaw. And Warsaw is still fighting.
Warsaw, in September 1939, is a city that refuses to accept what is happening to it. By the second week of the war, the Polish capital is surrounded on 3 sides. German artillery positions ring the city. Luftwaffe bombers appear over the rooftops with a regularity that the population has learned to measure not in days but in hours. The water supply is failing. Food is running short. The hospitals are overwhelmed. And yet, the city is fighting. Not just the soldiers, everyone. The defense of Warsaw is commanded by General Valerian Chuma, a tough, methodical officer who understands that he is not just defending a military position, he is defending the idea of Poland itself, the capital, the symbol, the place whose fall will tell the world that Poland is finished. He has approximately 120,000 soldiers inside the city, regular army units, garrison troops, and the survivors of the Bzurya fighting who have made it across the Vistula. He also has something that no military manual accounts for: the people of Warsaw. From the first days of the siege, civilians have been part of the defense in ways that blur every conventional line between soldier and non-combatant. Stefan Starzyński, the mayor of Warsaw, becomes one of the most important figures of the entire campaign. Every day, sometimes multiple times a day, he broadcasts on Warsaw radio. His voice, calm, determined, sometimes raw with emotion, reaches the people of the city through the static and the sound of explosions in the background. He tells them what is happening. He tells them what is needed. He asks them to keep going. They keep going. Women organize food distribution under artillery fire. Students man anti-aircraft positions on rooftops. Elderly men dig tank traps in the streets with whatever tools they can find. Children carry messages between defensive positions because they are small enough to move through rubble that adults cannot navigate.
The German commanders looking at Warsaw from the outside see a military problem, a city that needs to be taken, a defensive perimeter that needs to be broken. The people inside Warsaw see something different. They see their home, and they are not leaving it. On September 13th, the Germans launched their first major ground assault on the city. General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding the German forces surrounding Warsaw, sends infantry and armor into the southern suburbs of the city. The attack is supported by artillery and air power. On paper, the German forces are overwhelmingly superior to anything Warsaw can put in their path. In practice, the streets of Warsaw turn the German advantage upside down. Urban warfare neutralizes armor. The tanks that have been unstoppable on the open roads of Poland become vulnerable in the narrow streets of a city where every window is a potential firing position and every corner conceals an anti-tank gun. Polish defenders who have been retreating for 2 weeks suddenly have their backs against something they will not leave: their city. The September 13th assault is repelled. The Germans try again on September 15th, repelled again. But the bombardment never stops. The Luftwaffe flies over Warsaw in waves, not targeting military positions alone, but the city itself. Residential neighborhoods burn. Hospitals marked with Red Cross symbols are hit. The Old Town, centuries of Polish history compressed into narrow medieval streets, is reduced street by street to rubble and ash. On September 17th, the same morning Soviet tanks are crossing the eastern border, the Germans intensify the bombardment to a level that Warsaw has not yet experienced. Over 1,000 bombing sorties in a single day. Artillery firing continuously from positions on every side.
The city shakes. Buildings that survived the first 2 weeks of bombardment finally collapse. Water mains are destroyed. What little remains of the city's infrastructure begins to fail completely. Food supplies that were already desperately short become critical. Soldiers are sharing their military rations with the civilians fighting alongside them. Mayor Starzyński is still broadcasting. On September 23rd, he goes on the radio and says something that his listeners will remember for the rest of their lives. He describes Warsaw not as it is, burning, besieged, running out of everything, but as it will be. He describes the Warsaw that will be rebuilt, the schools and hospitals and theaters that will rise from the rubble, the city that will exist on the other side of whatever is coming. He speaks about it in the present tense, as if it is already happening, as if the outcome is not in doubt. In the shelters and the ruins and the improvised defensive positions across the city, people listen to his voice and find something in it that the bombs and the artillery and the hunger and the exhaustion have not been able to take away. Hope. not the hope that Warsaw will be saved. The hope that Warsaw will survive. Those are not the same thing. And the people of Warsaw in September 1939 understand the difference better than anyone.
While Warsaw burns, Poland is dying in 100 other places simultaneously. Not quietly, not without a fight. In the north, on the Hel Peninsula, a narrow strip of sand and pine forest stretching 40 kilometers into the Baltic Sea, Rear Admiral Joseph Unrug commands the Polish Naval Command with approximately 3,000 sailors and Marines. Hel is a strange place to make a last stand. The peninsula is never more than a few hundred meters wide. There is nowhere to retreat. The sea is behind them, and the Germans are in front. German artillery positions on the mainland can reach every point on the peninsula. The Luftwaffe owns the skies above. Unrug knows all of this. He fights anyway. The defense of the Hel Peninsula becomes one of the longest single engagements of the entire Polish campaign. German attempts to storm the peninsula are repelled one after another. Unrug's sailors, men trained for sea warfare, not infantry combat, learn to fight in trenches and foxholes with a stubbornness that repeatedly surprises German commanders, who expect the position to fall within days. The coastal artillery batteries on Hel sink or damage several German naval vessels attempting to support the land assault. The guns that were designed to defend Poland's access to the sea are used instead to defend the last piece of Polish coastline still flying the Polish flag. Unrug will hold Hel until October 2nd, 32 days after the invasion began. In the center of the country, the fortress of Modlin sits at the confluence of the Vistula and Narew rivers north of Warsaw. General Victor Thommy commands approximately 24,000 Polish soldiers defending Modlin's ancient walls and modern fortifications. The fortress has been under siege since the first week of the war. German artillery has been pounding its walls continuously. The garrison is running low on food, ammunition, and medicine. But Modlin is still fighting.
Thomé organizes his defense with the methodical precision of a man who understands that every day his fortress holds is another day that matters, not because it will change the outcome of the campaign, which is clearly decided, but because it is the right thing to do. His soldiers believe him. On September 29th, the last food reserves at Modlin run out. Thomé makes his decision. He negotiates the surrender of the fortress with the Germans, securing the best possible terms for his men, insisting on their treatment as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. The Germans, who have been trying to take Modlin for 4 weeks, agree. The garrison marches out on September 29th. They have held for 28 days. And in the forests of eastern Poland, near the small town of Kok, the very last organized Polish military resistance is forming around a man who refuses to accept that the war is over. General Francesca Kleeberg commands the Operational Group Policy, a force assembled from the remnants of units that have been fighting and retreating since September 1st, soldiers who have been marching for weeks, men who have crossed half of Poland on foot, fought in a dozen engagements, survived the German advance and the Soviet invasion and the collapse of everything around them. There are approximately 18,000 of them. They are exhausted beyond what most human beings can endure, and they are going to fight one more battle. Kleeberg's decision is not strategically rational. Warsaw has fallen, Modlin has surrendered, the Polish government is in exile in Romania. There is no objective that Group Policy can achieve that will change anything about the outcome of the campaign. Kleeberg knows this. He attacks anyway. The Battle of Kok begins on October 2nd, 31 days after the invasion started. Kleeberg's exhausted soldiers attack German positions with an aggression that stuns their opponents. For 3 days, the fighting rages through the forests and fields around the small town. A battle that most of the world will never hear about, fought by men who have already lost everything, except the decision about how they will end. On October 5th, Kleeberg assembles his remaining officers. The ammunition is gone, the food is gone. The men have given everything that can be asked of any human being. He gives the order to surrender. But before he does, he says something to his officers that several of them will remember and record for the rest of their lives. He tells them that Poland has not lost the war. Poland has lost a battle, a very long, very costly battle. But the real war, is just beginning. He is right. Polish pilots are already flying with the RAF in Britain. Polish soldiers are regrouping in France. The Polish Navy is operating in the North Sea. The Polish government in exile will continue to function throughout the entire war, coordinating resistance inside occupied Poland, contributing forces to every major Allied campaign, from the Battle of Britain to Monte Cassino to the beaches of Normandy. Poland has fallen. Poland has not surrendered. There is a difference. And the men marching into captivity at Kock on October 5, 1939, the last organized Polish soldiers to lay down their arms on Polish soil, understand that difference better than anyone.
October 6, 1939. The last shots of the Polish campaign have been fired. 35 days after the first German shells hit Westerplatte, the fighting on Polish soil is over. The numbers tell part of the story. Poland lost approximately 66,000 soldiers killed in combat, never return. Among them, thousands of Polish officers who will be taken to a forest called Katyn and shot in the back of the head by the NKVD in the spring of 1940. Germany lost approximately 16,000 soldiers killed and 30,000 wounded. Significant, but manageable for a military machine that has just conquered a country of 35 million people in 5 weeks. The Soviet Union lost almost nothing. They arrived when the outcome was already decided and took half a country for the price of a few hundred casualties. But the numbers, as always, tell only part of the story. What happened to Poland after the fighting stopped is in many ways darker than the campaign itself. Hitler divided his half of Poland into 2 parts. The western regions, Poznan, Lodz, parts of Silesia, were annexed directly into Germany. The population was to be Germanized. Poles who could not be assimilated were to be expelled or eliminated. Jewish communities that had existed for centuries were to be destroyed. The rest, the central region, including Warsaw and Krakow, became the general government, a territory with no legal status, no rights, no future. Governed by Hans Frank from Krakow Castle with a brutality that would eventually make occupied Poland the epicenter of the Holocaust.
In the east, Stalin's occupation was equally systematic and equally merciless. Mass deportations began immediately. Hundreds of thousands of Poles, soldiers, officials, teachers, priests, landowners, were loaded onto cattle cars and sent to Siberia and Kazakhstan. Families separated in the middle of the night, children taken from parents, an entire society dismantled by men with lists and absolute power. Poland in October 1939 is not just a defeated country. It is a country being erased. And yet, in London, the Polish government in exile is already functioning. Prime Minister Władysław Sikorski is meeting with Winston Churchill and laying the groundwork for Polish military contributions to the Allied war effort that will prove over the next 6 years to be extraordinary. Polish pilots who escaped through Romania and Hungary are arriving in France and Britain. They will fly in the Battle of Britain, the 303 Squadron becoming the highest-scoring Allied fighter squadron of the entire battle. They will fight at Tobruk and Monte Cassino. They will parachute into Holland at Arnhem. They will be among the first Allied soldiers to enter Bologna and Breda. The Polish Navy, the ships that escaped to Britain in the final days before the invasion, will serve throughout the entire war, escorting convoys in the Atlantic, participating in the hunt for the Bismarck, supporting the Normandy landings. And inside occupied Poland itself, the resistance begins almost immediately. The Armia Krajowa, the Home Army, will become the largest resistance movement in occupied Europe. Hundreds of thousands of men and women who refused to accept that the German and Soviet occupations were permanent, who kept fighting in the forests and the SIDS and the shadows for 6 years.
Who kept Poland alive when Poland had ceased to exist on any map? General Kleberg was right at Kock. Poland had not lost the war. It had lost a battle.
If this series has moved you, share it. Leave a comment about which moment of the Polish campaign affected you most. Subscribe. We are telling the complete story of the Second World War.